iHeartRadio presents Podversations, a weekly discussion with the biggest names and influencers in podcasting.
Hey, everybody, and thank you so much for joining for another session of the iHeartPodcast speaker series. My name is Conal Byrne. I'm the CEO of the iHeartMedia Digital Audio Group, and we've been doing these conversations for 2 or 3 years now. They started at a moment in our country and the world when we were moving into a different sort of pace and state, which was lockdown. And we wanted to find a way to stay connected to each other, to keep talking, keep having conversations with great creators and storytellers that we work with at iHeart, using podcasting as the sort of excuse to have these conversations. And they've turned into some of the best moments of my week, every week, being able to talk about what makes certain creators tick, from Will Ferrell to Malcolm Gladwell to Martha Stewart to Charlamagne the God. Just fantastic ways into people's sort of creative engines. And this week is a real special treat for me. I get to sort of sit with a dear friend of mine and also one of the truly best, most creative storytellers I've ever had the pleasure to work with. Mangesh Hattikudur, first of all, thank you so much for hanging out with us for half an hour.
No, I'm thrilled to. It's wonderful.
For anybody who knows a little bit about the background, Mangesh used to work at iHeart, used to be one of our lead executive producers for the iHeart Podcast Network. But you have a long sort of storied career already in content and making content and different kinds of content and putting that out there in the world. And what I sort of see as a through line across all the stuff you've made is always sort of looking a little bit at where storytelling and content's going, like just a little bit of a peek around the corner of taking what folks are doing and trying to sharpen the edges a bit, make it a little better, anticipating what might be the leveled up version of this that folks are doing now. But my take, and we will get into it. First, I want to just talk a little bit about where you come from, so folks have this background. You are in college, and you started a company allegedly out of a dorm room. Talk about that a little bit. What was the name of the company? How did it get started, and why?
Yeah, it was actually with Will Pearson, who I'm sure most of you know on staff here. But the company was called Mental Floss, and it came out of that mix of cockiness and naivete that you have when you're in your 20s, and Will and I had both really loved learning, and Will used to make these crazy lists of like favorite left-handed basketball players, or like whatever it was, and these massive lists, and had them around, and I was kind of obsessed with trivia, but our idea was like, we love learning, and where are you going to learn after college in a way that's not sort of no one has time to dig into musty textbooks, or you're so busy with your job or with kids or whatever. So what if there was a magazine that came to your doorstep and you could skim it, and it felt like your favorite professors sitting at a bar just chatting with you, telling their favorite things from their subjects. And so we went out and looked for it on newsstands and couldn't find it, and we decided, let's try to make it. And then we ordered a book called How to Launch a Magazine, and followed it page by page.
You ordered a book called How to Launch a Magazine to launch a magazine. And that was Mental Floss, which then sort of evolved into a website, mentalfloss.com. Did that for a while. Was it like just the world of startup for 5-10 years?
It was fun. I mean, we were such outsiders from the space that like we were always trying to get people's attention in different ways. So like very early on, we did a swimsuit issue where we found swimsuits of like Albert Einstein and Eleanor Roosevelt and Louis Armstrong, and the tagline was, "You don't have to love them for their minds anymore." But we were always just trying to like, a newsstand, like a podcast newsstand, is a really competitive space, and it's hard to get people's attention. So what are the little things that give you a tiny edge? And then the other thing we really tried to do was and it's something that I feel is very, very similar with podcasts, is we really tried to create people's favorite magazine. Like we tried to create something that people would just be so excited to have in their lives and welcome into their life and feel like it was a part of their identity. And so before long, we had these headlines that were pretty ephemeral, and we turned them into t-shirts, and that became like a t-shirt business. And then like we sort of anything that we thought could delight our readers, we'd sort of indulge in, whether that was trivia shows that moved across the country, to Freudian slippers, to whatever. And in that space, we did everything from a little bit of TV to white labeling content for other places to like 12 or 13 books.
Before I met you, before I worked with you or Will, I proudly owned a t-shirt that said "The Hokey Pokey, a place to turn yourself around." That Mental Floss shirt. But it strikes me that the stuff you guys were dreaming up and the way you were putting it out there in the world, which then became sort of kind of called a listicle, was co-opted, maybe a mean word, but sort of co-opted by other media companies like BuzzFeed and stuff like that. And when you saw that happen, when you saw this idea that you had brought out into the world of a new way to think about content, really fun, really consumable, but also super smart, what's that like to see other companies come in and sort of mimic it and take the ball and run with it and stuff like that? What was that moment like?
I mean, on one hand, you hope you're doing it better, right? And so like the lists that we tried to create were very much things that we hoped people would walk away actually having learned something. And on the other hand, it was encouraging for us to know that it wasn't just this sort of one tiny idea, but actually something that was more of a movement, and lots of a generation actually like to learn this way.
So around 2017, you joined what at the time was Stuff Media, this podcast network that had shows like Stuff You Should Know and ultimately shows like Atlanta Monster. You and Will Pearson joined the company to, at least at the start, to launch a show, Part-Time Genius. But then you quickly became sort of one of the lead executive producers at the company, launching some of the best content Stuff Media was making. That has a sort of crazy story across the next 4 or 5 years. Stuff Media got acquired by the iHeartMedia. That's how you and I came into the iHeartPodcast network. But before we get there, jumping into podcasting in 2017, I assume like a lot of us at that time, you were starting to listen to podcasts a lot. You were probably like, wow, this is a crazy, awesome medium, but I don't want to lead the witness either. Like, what was your take on it? Like jumping into a whole new medium, restarting to a certain extent as a creator and a producer. Where was your head at?
Yeah, I mean, my wife worked for StoryCorps for a number of years, so like I'd been aware of how powerful audio could be. But I think walking into Stuff Media, I was really stunned by the engagement that people had. The fact that like people would listen through Josh and Chuck's show 4 or 5 times through the entire catalog, like that they could go to Perth and sell out 3 nights in an auditorium, right? Like that sort of engagement doesn't happen that often. And it was really something I found special. Like the fact that I think at the time people were listening to 11 and a half hours of Stuff shows every week. And that's just a ridiculous metric, right? And so to me, it just felt like incredible opportunity. One, the culture of Stuff was, and you had helped create this too from your work there previously, but it was just a really nice place where people didn't feel threatened in a way, and I really loved that, and I felt like what was possible was there was this incredible core of content and this listener base that really loved it so dearly that when you tried to stretch what the brand could mean, they'd embrace it. And I think that was just a really exciting opportunity, because if how Stuff works, or Stuff like is basically can cover any topic, it gives you so much liberty to like tell great stories.
Was it hard to learn the craft of producing a good podcast? Like I imagine there's part of you jumping in as a host of the show Part-Time Genius, the first podcast you hosted for what was ultimately the iHeartPodcast network. some of that is probably just jump in, turn the mic on, I'll script it as best I can, and I'll figure it out. But producing a podcast where you're really trying to like break story, build treatments, learn what makes a good podcast treatment versus a bad podcast treatment. Some of the shows you were producing at the time were very ambitious and difficult stories to tell. Some of the best stuff I think that was happening in podcasting. Was that a craft that was like, wow, I'm actually figuring out what it means to make a good podcast, like a 12 episode series in audio only is a thing you can do it well or not well. And I'm learning what that's like. Like what was that process like?
I mean, for me, it was probably harder to be a host because Will is such a natural speaker and such a dynamic one, and you know, when you get paired with someone who's so good, and also for years he did all the press and I just, you know, script a couple jokes in the background, so it was that was much harder for me. But in terms of, you know, like it's one of those things that I've never known what I was doing, right? Like I didn't know how to make a magazine, and every magazine we made was filled with all sorts of production errors and stuff. And you just kind of learn as you go, but guided by a sense that you really believe in what you're doing. And for me, like all the shows we were making, like they had a real purpose. We weren't making crime shows for the like sake of making another crime show. It was like, oh, this show really talks about it from the perspective of victims, or this show really talks about what a Black mother goes through, or this show, you know, like each of these things had a real reason for telling it versus just like, this is more of what is popular. And I think when you're driven by purpose, and I also just like, I think good content creates its own luck, and you know, maybe that's Pollyanna, but I feel like I didn't have to do the hard work because I came into a studio that knew what they were doing, right? There were people like Tyler and Jerry and you know, like there and Matt and Alex and like people I could ask questions from and who very freely gave me guidance.
You talked a little bit about the engagement of the podcast listener, and I don't want to breeze over that comment. Before we get into your work today with Kaleidoscope, a new media company and podcast network that you've co-founded, before we get into that, why do you think that is about podcasting? Because as we've seen this strange phenomenon of podcasting, that as it's gone from 10 to 50 to now 120 million people in the country every month listen to a podcast. The crazier stat now is 80 million a week listen to a podcast. Those 80 million listen to 8 episodes a week each. So this is the newest mass reach medium in the world. The weirder stat is that engagement you're talking about hasn't really changed. As it's grown as a medium, people still listen to it sort of emphatically. Why is that? Why does this medium behave differently? Why that engagement, do you think?
I think there are some of the obvious things, right? Like the words that are overused, like intimacy and the idea of being in your ear. I mean, I think those are very real. And so I think when someone's telling you a story, it does foster a different connection. But I also think that over the past decade and maybe longer, right, we've been in this economy where things are constantly flashing at you for attention, right? Like it's, you know, whether it's like 3-second Facebook videos or your phone or Instagram or whatever it is, like everything is like competing. And in this space, like people have lost sense of what a brand is or a certain trust in media. At least that's my sense of it, is that like I go to great magazines that I used to trust and looking for like a pillow, right? And instead of just the great editor telling me this is the pillow I love, it's like 27 pillows that you should try, right? And I don't want 27 pillows, and also like all those 27 pillows are commissions that they get, right? And so like it somehow like voices and trust have been devalued in a great way in this space where everyone's constantly competing for your attention. Whereas in podcasts, you know you're going to sit with someone for half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour. They're constantly, whatever story they're telling you, the things that really draws you into like listening to maybe an episode I don't want to listen to of history class, or like that I don't think I want to listen to. Like I'm learning a little bit about Holly or a little bit about Tracy or whatever, right? Like on the edges, I actually fall in love with the personalities as much as I like the subjects, and so I think all of that really matters, and we've lost a sense of what honestly what a brand or what a voice can be, and podcasts has kind of retained that.
There's these weird 2 or 3 stats that sort of easy to remember, but about 60% of people say they trust podcast creators a little more than social media content. And because of that, about 60% of podcast listeners have bought something they've heard about on a podcast.
Yeah.
And because of that, about 60% of marketers are going to spend more, who spend in podcasting today are going to spend more next year. And it all feels very obvious when you work in the medium, because we know these creators, we work with them, they are what they say, but it's remarkable for a marketer. But let's get into Kaleidoscope. So the newest.
Well, just to step back for a second. I mean, like as soon as I realized that, like, and how undervalued podcasting was, I went and told all my friends who were at startups, like, you should be investing in this. Is so much of a smarter bet than anywhere else, where like you get a host read ad for a product, and they test it and they vet it, and they're speaking, and people aren't skipping over the ads, right? Like in some ways I felt the same way about magazines, where like, I could breeze past the ads if I wanted, or I could look at them and enjoy them because they were beautiful or interesting to me, and I don't skip past most podcast ads, but I do in TV and other mediums.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. That's the other stat that we haven't seen change, not to get into the weeds on this, but it's actually phenomenal that this podcast ad skip rate is still around 5 to 15%, depending on the show and the ad load. But the YouTube ad skip rate is 75%. And it's okay. It's just that's that medium's ad skip rate. It's just phenomenal that podcasting is really sort of in rarefied air, and hasn't changed.
It's also how you listen, right? I mean, like I mean, on one hand, I'm happy to listen to the ads as long as I'm not getting abused by them, right? And on the other hand, like it's not like I always just have my phone out and I'm watching it. Like I'm washing the dishes and playing through a speaker, and like it's unobtrusive.
Yeah. So you executive produced and created some truly amazing shows at the iHeartPodcast network, and will always be sort of family to us. Your newest wonderful chapter is a new company that you co-founded called Kaleidoscope. How did this seed get planted in your head, and where did it come from?
I mean, I had a lovely time at iHeart. I still, you were at the launch party and you saw all these iHeart people there. So it's not like I moved that far away from it. I think for me, I really love narrative shows. I think that's where my passion is. And one of the big learnings for me came from Women of Juarez, where I realized that you had actually commissioned the show and it ended up on my plate. And I thought, how are we going to make this show? This is a topic that people keep ignoring. This poor reporter, Monica Ortiz-Uribe, had been trying to get this on air for 10 years on NPR and couldn't get more than like 5 minutes at a time. Suddenly we had this 3-hour block to play with. But it occurred to us that if you put something in the veneer of like noir, and you really tell a story in a compelling manner, you can get people to pay attention to something that they don't really care about or don't seem to care about, right? Like you say immigration or border issues or Juarez, and like most people turn away. But what was stunning to me was not just that people listened through the series, but that because iHeart is who it is, the way the show was broadcast out, when it was advertised against conservative radio and against pop radio and against everything, and so as a result, a show that I thought would be very, very niche and very, very elitist and coastal ended up being very middle America, and it hit those other pockets too. But as a result, in the comments, you saw things like people saying on Twitter, "I'm a conservative. I used to be against immigration. I don't care who the F you are. Bring your daughters and wives over the border." Like that. To know that storytelling could act as an engine of empathy was just something that was remarkable to me. And you know, I mean, that wasn't the case with everything, but the idea that like, I mean, one of the reviews was, I listened to 3 hours of this and it's liberal garbage, or I listened to 10 episodes and it's like, yeah, but you listened to 10 hours, you know, or you spent your 3 hours, you spent all 10 episodes with us. And that, like, again, goes back to this engagement, right? Like people can be drawn into stories they don't realize that they want to. The other part for Kaleidoscope, for me personally, was very international. I felt like there wasn't, on one hand, you see things like Squid Games and Lupin and like these shows coming from other countries, and America, which had always been, you know, we don't really care about international film and international stories, whatever, you know, K-dramas as well, like all of a sudden embracing it, right? And so it felt like, oh, the world's ready for all of these stories. On the other hand, I mean, I personally was feeling like in the world there were all these isolationist leaders and nationalistic leaders, where certainly in places like India, but with the emergence of Brexit, with various politicians around the globe, I felt like there was this very like nationalist, we don't need the world identity emerging, while at the same time COVID was ripping through the world in a matter of 24 hours, right? And it just showed us how connected we were, how much we needed to rely on each other. And for me, the idea of telling really fun, unusual stories that weren't being told in podcasting, because as much as we love podcasts, like most of it tends to skew towards it over-indexes in true crime and chat shows, when actually there are all these genres that we love in every other medium, right? Like romance and adventure and mystery and whatever. And so like, if you could take those and try to expand podcasting into those spaces with an international audience and international stories, it felt like, oh, we can expand what podcasting means, maybe.
It's awesome. I mean, starting a startup during quarantine, is it the hardest time to do it or the best time to do it?
I don't know. I mean, I think on one hand, there were, you know, we needed some funding to start, and there were a lot of wealthy people who'd done quite well during that period. And so there was a lot of easy access to money that I don't think would have been there, certainly isn't there now, and wouldn't have been there maybe like 3 or 4 years prior. But also, like, media is hard. Startups are hard. Like you know, we are truly lucky that we benefit from a relationship with iHeart, in that, you know, if we didn't have a big distributor, we'd be lost in the space. But the fact that, like, you know, we can lean into this relationship and get the support that to drive up the numbers is and drive up awareness for the show is pretty important to our plan.
So let's wrap on the first 2 shows you're going to roll out into the world from Kaleidoscope. They're distributed by iHeart, as you said, but they're produced by you and the Kaleidoscope team. First is on chocolate. The second's on astrology. So it gives, I think, people watching and listening a good example of how this is different. They're not too obvious topics. And especially as you're going to talk through them just a little bit, folks will get a sense of how I know this because I've worked with you in the past, but how you always sort of have a different take on even well-worn or even sort of well-worn mediums, which I just think is awesome. Start with the chocolate one. So the launch party you're talking about, for those watching and listening, Mangesh and his business partner, Oz Walashan, had an awesome launch party in New York recently for the first show about chocolate, which you'll get into. Second show is going to be on astrology, but this was like this very sort of like multimedia experience where there's incredible chocolate happening in the corner, but also just a sort of a who's who room of notables from the New York media team, elite, and all just sort of really passionately interested in this new thing you were rolling out? Where did the idea come from? How did you put it together? What's the thrust of it?
Yeah, I mean, to that end, it was like what? Well, I mean, it was there were some media lead, and you included, and then like my
Right.
mom and like friends from high school. So it wasn't like it was a nice mix. But just to let you know who my invites were. But, what we're trying to say, like, what is this company, right? Like, when you launch, you're trying to figure out like how do we make a declaration of what we are, and for us, like, what's a show that's fun and weird and anyone can sort of like listen into. For the idea was to make an Indiana Jones of chocolate, right? Like to follow these. There's a strange treasure hunt for these rare and exotic chocolates that people thought were mythical until very recently, and it's these wild cacao that only strains that only occur on the banks of the Amazon. And so we follow a couple characters as they race to try to save these chocolates, and the chocolates are otherworldly. Like they sell for $360 a tablet. Like if you put chocolate is actually a much more complicated flavor profile than wine. It's like 4 or 5 times more complicated, so these cacaos have everything from notes of lychee to wood flavors to florals that you wouldn't expect, and they taste nothing like the chocolates that you generally have. So we follow this German cacao hunter as he goes through to figure that out, and also this Brazilian woman, Louisa Abrams, who takes some ayahuasca, realizes that her life is all going to be all about chocolate, and proceeds to make it so. But I think the thing that's interesting about chocolate is that wild cacao actually needs the cover of the rainforest to grow. And so if you can protect this cacao, you actually protect the rainforest from devastation. And so it's weirdly an environmental adventure story without being on its sleeve in an environmental story. And to go with it, we thought, what if what if we could the chocolate. I remember as a kid watching this Mr. Rogers episode where he went to a popsicle factory, and I remember being so angry that I couldn't taste the popsicle at the end of it. And we were describing these chocolates and the waves of flavor, and I remember thinking like, what if we tried to make this chocolate? And Oz made some phone calls, and we called Louisa, and we actually made this little library of chocolates that has 3 different chocolate bars. They're treated exactly the same except for the cacao bean, and so you can taste what cacao does to different chocolate bars. But and all sourced from the Amazon, and those are out as well. And so we just thought it'd be a fun thing to do.
It's such a smart extension of it. Like what we've been focused in podcasting for the last 5 or so years is derivative works in the form of TV and film. And a lot of great podcasts have made a lot of great TV shows, but I don't think many are thinking outside the box like that to think, well, what if it becomes a chocolate bar instead of a movie? Which is really cool. What about the astrology show?
Yeah, the astrology show is being Indian and growing up in kind of 2 worlds. You end up being a diplomat in a way where you're always explaining things to the other culture. So like whether I was explaining that no, America is not like Baywatch, and that isn't what my high school looks like, to in India to like explaining things like arranged marriage to kids in the States. And astrology was always one of those things that was kind of too far for me to explain. It felt like too outlandish, and it was something I didn't even want to touch. It was like third rail. But increasingly, especially in COVID, you saw people leaning into astrology in dating apps. Bumble actually allows you to separate your profiles that you're interested in by signs. VCs have invested dramatically in the space, and people say things like, the comments are outlandish, but things like the Pattern or CoStar could be as big as Spotify is kind of a ludicrous statement, but one that people believe. Meanwhile, in India, like marriages are made or broken based on astrology. businesses wait months or sometimes years to begin because of the dates being propitious. And you see things like how this affects the world there. Like I was talking to an OBGYN who said that astrology is like the bane of his existence because parents will come in and grandparents will come in and say that for a C-section, which is an elective procedure, they want their baby delivered within this minute and a half because that's what'll give their child the best life moving forward, right? And so like astrology, whether you believe it or not, astrology has this dramatic impact on the world. You know, Reagan consulted an astrologer, and it's pretty well known that he wouldn't have talked to Gorbachev or reduced his, had nuclear reduction, like if it hadn't been for an astrologer whispering in his ear. But Nixon also saw an astrologer, Yeltsin, Francois Mitterrand, like the number of people who are susceptible to astrology is really kind of fascinating. But the driving engine for the show is that I went to an astrologer kind of on a lark, just for the fun of it, and he gave me a mostly great reading, and then he told me my dad would fall ill and maybe not make it through the year, and that's exactly what happened. And so it's astrology, but it's also memoir.
Was there anything already on your radar about your dad's health, or at the moment was this a blindside?
So my dad had been pretty healthy, but he'd gotten this I guess a week before, he'd gotten this note from the doctor that said his liver counts had spiked a little, but it was nothing to be worried about. And then I went to the astrologer, and 20 minutes later, I got a note from my dad that things had gone south pretty quickly.
It's really startling. I mean, for it to be anchored in that personal experience, I think you're right. I think it's sort of sort of like the chocolate blind spot for some of us, where this is what I've always felt you were so good at, was taking a topic that feels like, I feel sort of familiar with that topic, but then putting it out in a new way where it feels oddly, deeply personal, but just totally different too, it's really hard to do that. And I think you've done it so well every single time.
I appreciate that. I mean, it's putting things out is hard, and you hope that you're gambling on the right things. But part of the hope too was like, look, there's a whole world of people. Astrology is one of those things that other people really believe in, or they're really skeptical of. And so like, what's it feel like to make a show that's for skeptics and believers, right? And also it's such a Indian first gen story that like, what is there an audience that isn't listening to podcasts who could be hooked into the medium through this vehicle? And so I think those are part of the reasons, but the other part of it is that it's really funny to take mundane questions, like one person asked, what's going to happen to BTS, and trying to like figure that out like through astrology, or there's a 74-year-old woman whose marriage broke up, and she wants to know, well, dating is awful as a 74-year-old. Should I engage an escort? And like, we ask an astrologer that, and so it's much wider and more bizarre, I hope, than people come into it expecting.
My guest today it's awesome to talk to you, man. My guest today has been Mangesh Hattikudur. He has a long history in making amazing content on the internet and beyond. Can
I whisper one last thing to you?
Yes, please do.
And I think you might know this, but not everyone does. But we're doing a show about a cosmonaut. The next show that's coming out is about a cosmonaut who went up into space. The Soviet Union disbanded beneath him, and there was no country to bring him down. But it's hosted by Lance Bass, who actually went went to Roscosmos and is super excited to do a whole bunch of promotion for this. And so I think if Kaleidoscope has a breakout show this year, I think that'll be it. And so hopefully, any idea
what the name of it's going to be?
The Last Soviet.
Love it. Mangesh, who now in your newest, again, awesome chapter is a co-founder of a company called Kaleidoscope, just making some of the best podcast content out there in the world. iHeart is a partner of Kaleidoscope. We distribute their shows. But Mangesh, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. I really appreciate it, man.
It's so fun to hang out, Conal.
Everybody, thank you so much for listening. I will see you next week. Be well.
Podversations is a production of iHeartRadio. You can find more from the biggest names in podcasting on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.